The town of Millstone carried with it the kind of silence that felt too heavy, as though the streets themselves were holding back secrets. At the edge of that town, behind a row of dead trees and leaning fences, stood a house that locals rarely spoke about. To most, it was just a structure that had been left to rot. But there was a reason children never dared to step onto its lawn. A reason neighbors always kept their blinds closed facing that direction. They said the house remembered. They said it listened. When Matthew and Claire, along with their 2 kids, pulled up in their rusty minivan, the neighbors watched from behind curtains. No one came out to greet them. No one even waved. The family thought it was because they were new, outsiders in a tight-knit town, but the truth was, everyone knew what that house had done to the people who lived there before, and nobody wanted to be responsible for warning them. Claire, ever the optimist, stepped out first, brushing strands of hair from her face as the wind picked up. "It just needs a little love," she said, her voice full of hope, as she looked at the weathered siding, the cracked windows, and the weeds clawing at the porch steps. Matthew only nodded. They had sunk their last savings into this house, a foreclosure that came too cheap to pass up. He told himself it was just age, just neglect. A house was wood and nails, nothing more. The children, Lily and Ben, ran up the creaking steps, laughing at the way the boards moaned under their feet. Their laughter seemed too loud against the hollow quiet of the street. Lily pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "It's bigger than I thought," she said. Ben was too busy trying to force the front door open to notice the faint writing on the wall just inside, marks that looked like scratches, but spelled out something almost readable, like a hand had etched them in desperation. When the door gave way, the smell hit them, mouldy rot, and something metallic that clung to the back of their throats. Claire wrinkled her nose but pushed forward, determined. Inside, the air was heavy and cold, far colder than it should have been for summer. Dust swirled with each step they took, but the floor was strangely clean in places, as though someone or something had been walking there recently. Lily froze in the living room. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "Did you hear that?" Claire turned, brushing it off. Probably just the wind. But Lily swore she heard a voice, soft, faint, almost like another child giggling from somewhere deep in the walls. That night, after they had settled into sleeping bags since the beds hadn't yet arrived, the house shifted. Wood groaned as if it was exhaling after years of silence. Matthew lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He told himself it was just an old structure, adjusting to the warmth of new bodies inside. But then he heard it too, a whisper low and drawn out, sliding through the cracks in the walls. He turned his head toward Claire, but she was already sitting upright, eyes wide, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Neither of them spoke, because both of them had heard the same thing. The house had whispered a word. Matthew tried to laugh it off in the morning, though his voice carried the nervous edge of someone who didn't quite believe his own excuse. "Old pipes," he said, sipping burnt coffee from a chipped mug. "Air moving through the walls. Houses do." Claire didn't argue, but she hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she swore she could still hear that faint hiss curling around her ears. "Stay." The kids, of course, seemed oblivious. Lily and Ben were already exploring the upstairs, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. Every so often, they called out for their parents to come see something strange. A closet door that didn't open, wallpaper that peeled back to reveal more scratches underneath. The writing looked like words, but faded and broken, almost as if whoever carved them had been rushed or interrupted. "Do you think it's graffiti?" Claire asked, running her hand over one of the jagged markings on the upstairs landing. Matthew shrugged, though the lines of his jaw tightened. "Or just bored kids sneaking in here before it was sold. We'll paint over it." But Lily tugged on her mother's arm. "It's not graffiti. It's letters. It says something. She squinted, tracing the indent with her finger. It says, "Don't answer back." That night, the house was even colder. The air vents rattled, despite the fact that the furnace hadn't been turned on in years. Matthew tossed and turned, the sound of faint scratching keeping him awake. He sat up once, sure he had heard footsteps in the hallway, but when he checked, it was empty. Just a narrow corridor lined with shadows that seemed too thick for the dim glow of his flashlight. Claire woke gasping just before dawn, her skin clammy with sweat. She swore she had been dreaming of children's laughter, high-pitched and shrill, echoing from inside the walls. But the most terrifying part wasn't the sound. It was the sense that the house had been listening to her as she dreamed. Listening and waiting. The following evening, while unpacking a box of books in the living room, Claire heard Ben whispering. She thought he was talking to his sister, but when she peeked around the corner, Lily wasn't there. Ben was sitting cross-legged on the dusty carpet staring at the fireplace. "Who are you talking to, honey?" Claire asked gently. Ben didn't look up. "The boy in the wall," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "He says he lives here too." Claire's stomach turned to ice. She crouched down, forcing a smile. "There's no boy in the wall, sweetie. Maybe you just imagined it." Ben finally lifted his eyes to hers. They were wide, unblinking. "He said not to tell you. He said if I tell, the house will get mad." That night, as the family settled in again, the whispers grew louder. This time it wasn't a single word. It was a string of voices, overlapping and urgent, all coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Some were pleading, some were crying, and one was laughing. Matthew bolted upright, his breath ragged, as the wallpaper near the bed seemed to ripple. For a moment it looked like fingers pressing outward from inside the wall, clawing to get free. Claire screamed, clutching the children close, and then the voices all fell silent at once. The house was listening. The house was waiting. The house was waiting. The silence, after the voices vanished, was worse than the whispers themselves. It was thick, suffocating, as though the house had swallowed its own breath. Claire sat frozen with the children pressed against her, her eyes darting around the room, as if the walls might split open. Matthew, pale and sweating, forced himself to stand, muttering something about drafts and faulty foundations, though his hands trembled so violently he could barely hold the flashlight. The morning came slow and grey, the light struggling to break through the dirty windows. No one spoke much at breakfast. Ben stirred his cereal until it turned to mush. Lily kept glancing at the walls, her small shoulders stiff. Claire tried to push normalcy back into the air, talking about painting the kitchen or planting flowers outside, but every word felt brittle, like glass that would shatter with the slightest touch. Later that day, while Matthew was in town buying supplies, Claire decided to clean the upstairs bathroom. She knelt by the tub, scrubbing layers of grime, when she noticed the tiles behind the faucet. They weren't aligned quite right, as if someone had pried them off and hastily set them back in place. On instinct, she pressed against one. It gave way, sliding out with a hollow click. Behind it, in the damp darkness, something was wedged. Her breath hitched as she reached inside and pulled out a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. The fabric crumbled at her touch, releasing a smell that was sharp and coppery. Inside were yellowed scraps of paper, each filled with jagged writing, smeared as though written in a frantic hand. The words were simple, but they chilled her to the bone. "It hears. Do not reply. Do not listen. If it speaks your name, run." Claire shoved the papers back into the hole, her pulse racing, her mind screaming to leave them there, to forget she ever saw them. But the words clung to her thoughts like thorns. That evening, while the family ate dinner by candlelight, since the power still flickered in and out, Ben started humming softly. It was a tune no one recognized, a lilting melody, strange and sad. Claire frowned. "Where did you learn that song, sweetie?" Ben didn't answer right away. He kept humming, his spoon poised above his plate, his eyes distant. Finally, he whispered, "The boy taught me. He said I should sing it so the house knows we belong." Lily dropped her fork, her face paling. "Mum," she said in a shaky voice, "I heard it too. Last night, a girl was singing in my room. She said if I sang with her, she wouldn't be lonely anymore." Matthew slammed his hand against the table, the candles flickering wildly. "Enough. It's just your imaginations. This house is old. It creaks. It plays tricks. That's all." But even as he said it, the tune Ben had been humming drifted back, soft and distant, coming from somewhere upstairs, the exact same notes echoing in perfect rhythm. The family froze, and then slowly, the words began to crawl across the living room wall, as though an invisible hand was carving them in fresh scratches. "Sing with us." Matthew stood so quickly, his chair toppled over, the sound sharp against the suffocating silence that followed the words on the wall. His chest rose and fell like he'd just sprinted a mile. Claire pulled the children close, her eyes locked on the fresh scratches. They were so deep. Flakes of paint curled off the wall and drifted to the floor like dead skin. "No one's singing," Matthew hissed, his voice breaking. "No one is here but us." He grabbed a broom and slammed it against the wall, each thud echoing through the hollow bones of the house. "Do you hear me? Stop this." The silence that followed felt like the house had swallowed his anger whole. Then came the laughter, soft at first, like children hiding in the dark corners of a room, then louder, multiplying, filling every crevice of the house, until the sound seemed to come from inside their own heads. Lily screamed and buried her face in her mother's chest. Ben only stared wide-eyed, almost entranced, as if the sound belonged to something familiar. That night, no one slept. Matthew stayed awake, clutching a flashlight, its beam trembling across the cracked wall. Claire sat by the children, humming quietly to calm them, but every few minutes the melody was echoed back, mocked, from somewhere deep within the house. By dawn, Matthew had made up his mind. "We're leaving," he said flatly, shoving clothes back into suitcases. "I don't care if we lose every cent. This place isn't safe." But when they carried their bags down to the front door, it wouldn't open. Matthew twisted the knob until his knuckles went white, rammed his shoulder against the wood, but it was like the door had fused to the frame. The windows wouldn't budge either. Even the glass, when struck with a heavy lamp, didn't crack. It only quivered like water, rippling outward before settling back into stillness. Claire clutched his arm. "It doesn't want us to leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. By evening, exhaustion dragged them all into uneasy sleep. Sometime in the night, Claire opened her eyes to the sound of whispering, not from the walls this time, but from right beside her. She turned slowly. Ben was sitting at the foot of the bed, his small face illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. His lips moved, murmuring in rhythm, but the words didn't sound like his own. His eyes were wide, glassy, fixed on the corner of the room. "Ben," Claire whispered, heart pounding. He didn't look at her. Instead, in a voice that was not entirely his, he said, "They said you should answer. They don't like being ignored." Matthew stirred awake at her gasp, his eyes darting to their son. "Answer who?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Ben's head turned slowly toward him, and in a chorus of voices, some male, some female, some high-pitched like children, the reply came, spilling from Ben's mouth like smoke. The sound of that single word rattled through the room, like a chill that no blanket could hold back. Claire yanked Ben into her arms, clutching him as if her grip could pull him free from whatever had spoken through him. His body went limp against her shoulder, but his eyes remained open, staring into nothing. Matthew staggered backward, the flashlight beam cutting across peeling wallpaper, his face ashen. "Ben, wake up." Claire begged, shaking him gently, but his lips still moved, whispering fragments of words she couldn't understand. They weren't English. They weren't even sounds she recognized, like a chorus of voices tangled into one language that didn't belong to the living. Suddenly, the floor beneath them shuddered. A deep groan ran through the house, so low it vibrated in their bones. The dishes in the kitchen rattled, books toppled from shelves, and dust rained from the ceiling. Lily screamed, clinging to her mother. "It's angry, Mom, it's angry." Matthew, panic overtaking reason, shouted into the shadows, "What do you want from us?" His voice cracked against the oppressive silence that followed. For a moment, it seemed the house was holding its breath. Then, slowly, letters began to etch themselves into the far wall, one long stroke at a time, as though invisible fingers were clawing them into the plaster. Stay, sing, remember. The air turned colder, their breath misting in front of their faces. Claire sobbed, rocking Ben, who still murmured in that alien tongue. "Please," she whispered, "let us go. We didn't do anything to you." But the walls groaned again, and this time the writing spread across the ceiling, jagged and frantic. "You are ours now." That night, sleep was impossible. They huddled together in the living room, the candlelight casting long trembling shadows. Claire tried to keep her eyes on the children, whispering prayers under her breath. Lily clutched her doll so tightly, its arms snapped off. But she didn't notice. Her gaze never left the dark staircase, where she swore someone was standing, watching. Near midnight, Matthew heard it again. The song, faint, coming from the upstairs hallway, lilting and sorrowful. He rose to his feet, jaw set. "I'll end this," he muttered, grabbing the flashlight. "Don't go up there," Claire hissed, her voice breaking. But he ignored her, climbing one creaking step after another. The song grew louder, weaving through the house, like a thread pulling him forward. When he reached the landing, his light flickered. At the far end of the hallway stood a door, one they hadn't opened since moving in. The handle was rusted, the wood swollen from years of damp, yet from behind it came the melody, now clear, sung by the voice of a child. Matthew's hand shook as he reached for the knob. It turned easily, as though the door had been waiting for him. He pushed it open, the hinges groaning like a scream. Inside was a small windowless room. The walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of names etched deep into the wood, overlapping and jagged, as though dozens of hands had scratched them in desperation. And there, in the corner, sat a child's rocking chair. It began to move on its own. The chair creaked forward, then back, slow and steady, as though an unseen child sat cradled in it. Matthew's breath caught in his throat, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The beam slid across the carvings on the wall. Names, endless names. Some were dated decades ago. Others, so fresh the wood still splintered where the letters had been dug in. His eyes snagged on one that froze him in place. "Ben, no," Matthew whispered, stepping back, the light quivering across the room. "No, that's not possible." The rocking chair stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing in on him from all sides. Then, in the stillness, came a voice. It was high and childlike, yet layered with something far older, heavier. "He belongs to us now." Matthew staggered, his back hitting the doorframe. "You can't have him," he shouted, his voice breaking, echoing down the dark hall. "He's my son." The carvings on the walls trembled, wood splintering, as though invisible hands clawed them deeper. The chorus of voices rose, filling the small room, every pitch and tone overlapping, into a sound that made his skull throb. The rocking chair slammed forward with sudden force, striking the floor. Downstairs, Claire clutched Ben tighter, jolting as his body convulsed in her arms. His eyes rolled back, lips moving in time with the cacophony. Matthew heard above. Lily screamed, pointing at the walls. Dark stains were spreading, bleeding through the wallpaper, words forming in thick, wet strokes. "Answer us, sing with us, stay with us." Claire's sobs grew desperate. She shook Ben violently, pleading, "Come back to me, baby, please." But his voice only grew louder, layered, not his own. Upstairs, Matthew, in a frenzy, lifted the flashlight and hurled it against the rocking chair. It shattered into pieces, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, the voices stopped. He could hear his own breath, ragged and panicked. Then, out of the blackness, something small and cold wrapped around his wrist. He yanked back instinctively, but the grip was iron strong. A child's whisper brushed his ear. "It's too late." The house already choked. With a guttural cry, Matthew tore himself free. Stumbling down the stairs, he nearly fell as he reached the living room, where Claire and Lily were huddled around Ben's rigid body. His small frame shook violently, his lips moving in whispers too fast to follow. Matthew grabbed his son's shoulders, shouting over the roar of unseen voices, "You fight it, Ben. You hear me? You fight it." The lights in the house flickered violently, bulbs bursting one by one. The windows rattled, then warped, as though the glass itself was breathing. A storm of sound rose all around them, screams, laughter, cries, and then through it all, a single word etched itself in fresh blood across the floorboards at their feet: "Forever." The floorboards bled the word until the letters glistened, seeping into the cracks like veins spreading through the house. Claire clutched Ben against her chest, rocking him frantically, her tears dripping onto his lifeless face. His whispers had stopped, but his body was frighteningly still. His lips parted slightly, as though something had finally left him behind. Matthew dropped to his knees beside them, shaking his son's shoulders. "Ben, breathe. Please, just breathe." His voice cracked, raw with terror. Lily sobbed uncontrollably, burying her face in her mother's side, her small frame trembling as the storm of voices roared all around them. The walls shuddered violently, pictures crashing to the floor, plaster cracking in jagged lines. The house was alive now, its anger and hunger undeniable. The chorus rose louder, filling every inch of space, their words clear at last. "One stays. One must stay. Always one must stay." Claire's head snapped up, her wide eyes meeting Matthew's. The meaning was undeniable. The house didn't want all of them. It wanted one soul bound forever within its walls. Matthew's face went pale, realization sinking in like ice through his veins. He looked at Ben's limp body, then at Lily's tear-streaked face, then at Claire. His chest heaved. "It wants a sacrifice." Claire shook her head violently. "No, I won't choose. I won't give it any of us." But the house didn't wait. The floor beneath Ben split with a thunderous crack, jagged boards snapping apart to reveal a black, yawning void. A wind howled upward, pulling at his small body with invisible hands. Claire screamed, clutching him tighter, her fingernails digging into his skin as she fought to hold on. Matthew lunged forward, grabbing both of them, but the pull was so strong he felt his grip slipping. The voices grew deafening, all crying out the same word again and again: "Stay, stay, stay." In a heartbeat of desperation, Matthew understood. It wouldn't stop until it had taken one of them. His eyes locked on Claire's, full of pain, apology, and a love too deep for words. "I'll stay," he whispered. Before she could scream, before she could reach out, Matthew wrenched himself free and threw his weight forward, into the darkness, clawing at Ben. The pull seized him instantly, dragging him down with a force that ripped the air from his lungs. The last thing Claire saw was his face disappearing into the void, his voice swallowed by the chorus of children crying and laughing. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the house fell silent. The floor snapped shut, the boards sealing as if nothing had happened. The cold vanished, the whispers died, and Ben gasped violently in Claire's arms, life surging back into his body. She clutched him, sobbing, while Lily clung to her side, but her eyes never left the spot where Matthew had vanished. The silence of the house was worse than the voices. It was the silence of something satisfied. Days later, The neighbors watched from behind their curtains again as Claire led her children away, their suitcases dragging behind them. No one offered help. No one asked questions. They all knew no family ever truly left that house whole. And inside, in the room with the rocking chair, a new name had appeared on the wall, carved deep, fresh, and final. Matthew. The chair rocked slowly, as if welcoming him home. Some houses keep memories, but this one keeps souls. If you felt the chill of this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Crimson Truth, where the darkest mysteries are told. And remember, some doors should never be opened.